Hi, and welcome back to Beyond Borders, the LU Off-Campus Programs podcast. Today I have an amazing guest with me. Do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah. Hi, I'm Billy Greene. I am a junior. My pronouns are they, them. I study English, creative writing, and gender studies here at Lawrence. And this past fall, I went to Tamaki Makarau in Auckland in Aotearoa, New Zealand,
Cool.
at the University of Auckland.
Nice. That's awesome. So I guess something that I always like to start with is how did you find yourself in your program specifically while you were studying abroad?
Mm. So I found the New Zealand program while just like perusing the IES site. That was who I went with, IES Abroad. And I know they do a lot of programs around the world, but I was particularly drawn to Aotearoa, New Zealand because I'm a big hiker.
Okay.
And obviously New Zealand is one of the most like gorgeous countries in the world.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you see Hobbit, you see Lord of the Rings. I actually didn't see either of those movies before I went, so maybe I'm bad. Um, but what actually cemented it for me was I watched Hunt for the Wilder People for the first time. Have you seen that
I
movie?
haven't seen it, no.
It's a New Zealand movie made in New Zealand by like Kiwi directors. Kiwi is what you
Mm-hmm.
call a person from New Zealand. Um, and so much of that movie just takes place in like really rural New Zealand. And I was like, this looks like a different planet. I need to go there. And it had already been like percolating in my
Uh-huh.
mind for a little while. And so yeah, I just started my application and then I submitted it, got accepted, and then I went.
That's awesome. I love that. Um, so I guess the way that I found out about you specifically was that I was asked to promote your blogs that you
Mm,
posted for IES abroad while you were gone, and I was hoping you could kind of talk about how did you get put in that situation where you started blogging. I know IES has a great program
hmm.
for like students to share their experience. I did that too while I was abroad.
Oh,
So
where did you go?
I went to Freiburg, Germany
Oh,
for
that's
the
awesome.
EU program. So
That's
yeah.
awesome.
But how did you get involved with IES and doing that student sort of correspondence side?
Yeah, so I didn't know students actually like wrote the articles because I remember like perusing the site and seeing like write-ups, and I thought that was just like, oh, those are just probably staff members like
Mm-hmm.
writing about the programs. But then I got like the correspondent email because they sent me an email after I got accepted, basically being like, oh yeah, you could get like a little bit of money writing for us,
Mm-hmm.
and I already work at the Laurentian here, the student newspaper here. But I hadn't done really anything blog related.
Okay.
And once I started perusing like the site a little bit more in depth, I kind of was like, I wish there were more like recommendations or like guides on the website before I went, so like I could have something I wanted to do because the site was a little sparse.
Uh-huh.
So I applied hoping to mostly write about like, oh, here's what I'm doing on my day to day. Here's like all the cafes I want to recommend, all the restaurants, all the hikes I want to
Mm-hmm.
recommend, um, just to give a little bit of a blueprint for future students. Just because I'm a big believer that like writing is sharing,
Right.
and to be able to like articulate your voice and have a platform for that, that is an honor.
Mm-hmm.
So it was really awesome being able to blog for them and kind of give those blueprints. And I also wrote about other things later on in the semester, but I know we're going to get to that in a
Yeah.
couple questions.
Couple questions. Yeah. So I guess yeah, I was reading through them and I was like, this is very I we also had some student bloggers and that wasn't what I did specifically, but it was very like informative, like exactly what I would have wanted to know, especially with those like the cafe ones, the hike ones, the differences between
Mm,
American University and the University of Auckland. I
mm-hmm.
thought that one was particularly interesting. Seeing as we go to the same American university, I was like, this is so fun to hear the differences, right? Um, so I guess did you like did you know before going that you wanted to talk about X, Y, and Z and like made that as part of your goal while studying abroad was to figure out what
mm.
other people would want to know? Or did you just like go out there and do your stuff and then retroactively was like, this would make for a good blog?
I mean, I had like a list before I went of things I generally wanted to explore, just to
Uh-huh.
like have it put to paper, have it put to words, just because sometimes when I don't like write down what I want to do, I don't end up doing it.
Right.
So it was a bit of both, I'd say, because once I was there, I like obviously involved myself in a lot of different activities. I did a
Okay.
lot of hiking, of course, and I met a ton of people who gave me recommendations,
Mm-hmm.
and through people I met other people, and just because over there it's a lot different than it is here at Lawrence, because obviously Lawrence is kind of a bubble in Appleton. It's a
Yeah.
very small school. Everybody kind of knows everybody, but University of Auckland is this massive public research university with like 50,000 people. I was
Mm-hmm.
meeting new people every day. And so through talking with a lot of locals and other international students, I was being pointed to all of these different like places and things I wanted to write about. So it was a bit of both. It was just kind of like accommodating my American hobbies and American interests to this different culture.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and like you were saying, just kind of comparing the two and yeah, just following my gut and not really doubting what I'm writing about.
Yeah, I love that. So you kind of started to talk about what the experience was like at the University of Auckland. What, um, I guess, do you have any? Can you outline some of those differences for those who haven't read your blog? And maybe talk about like your experience in your classes, what classes you were taking, stuff like that.
Yeah. It's very different. It's like
Yeah.
the complete opposite of Lawrence, which I personally loved, just because it was a bit of a different exit or entrance point into the like fields I'm interested in studying,
Okay.
creative writing and gender studies
Mm-hmm.
primarily. Um, for example, creative writing classes here are very small, very seminar, same with gender studies. And you workshop works together, you talk about your work. Whereas at the University of Auckland, the creative writing class I took over there, that had 100 people in it. It was in a lecture theater.
Uh-huh.
And it was also, although it was only an intro level class, it was listed as like a senior level class,
Hmm.
which was really interesting. And there were 5 different workshops. There were like a couple TAs. Um, and it was a very different approach to what I'm used to, especially for creative writing, because I feel like here, um, a lot of it is just focused on like getting it out and like
Yeah.
cultivating that practice and starting to like articulate how you feel. Whereas in the University of Auckland, it's a lot more geared to like publishing.
Okay.
Like what in your work can you improve to make this publishable and salient in a bit more of a market?
Huh.
So it was a very different approach, and
Mm-hmm.
having taken creative writing classes here, it was really cool to like mold my writing towards more of like a salient aspect, just because I'm used to writing kind of like not inaccessible stuff, but like stuff that obviously is very personal to
Right.
me.
Yeah.
Um, so learning how to like kind of make that a little bit more tangible, holding space for both like my emotions and like, oh, other people are going to read this.
Right.
That was really nice. And I learned a lot in that class. It was probably my favorite class I took over there. As for gender studies, honestly, the gender studies class wasn't that different. It was just bigger and a bit more lecture based, but we still had seminar.
Mhm.
We still had a lot of reading, which was a
Yeah.
lot of fun. Um, and the gender studies class I took over there, which was specifically about commodifying gender, specifically like in today's modern day marketing practices, and there was a lot of other things on that syllabus, maybe not safe to talk about on a podcast.
Okay.
But it was a really interesting class, and it was almost like a graduate level class, because I remember the instructor being like, "Oh yeah, this was originally just going to be for grad students, but I opened it up for undergrad." Um, and that professor was an American,
Okay.
so we connected on that.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but yeah, just kind of cycling back to my main point, I went off on a bit of a tangent there.
We love
Um,
tangents on the podcast. So,
um, yeah, just like larger classes. Like I was meeting new people every day, talking to new people in my classes every time.
mm-hmm.
Less discussion based, a lot more lecture. Um, yeah, and also campus is massive.
Yeah.
Like it would take me like 20 minutes to walk between classes
Oh my
sometimes.
gosh.
And you're obviously in a city, which was a lot of fun because I could just like, oh, I'll just do a little pit stop at the cafe between my classes and
Yeah.
grab a little flat white with oat milk. A flat white is like a type of coffee over there that's pretty similar to a latte.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, it was fun. It was very, very different.
Nice. And so I guess personally I've never been to a big like college or school like that. How
Hmm.
do you make those connections? I feel like in order to like stand out in a group of 100 people in your class, you have to be uh very like assertive and like out there and be willing to kind of talk to anyone and make those sort of connections. So do you have any advice for somebody who might be going to New Zealand, and how do you navigate moving from classes of 20 to classes of 100, right?
Totally. Honestly, Lawrence prepares you so well on how to articulate your thoughts and do that in a concise and clear manner.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like by virtue of how humanistic our school is, how liberal arts, um, you have to know how to make an argument. And that pays dividends at a large public research university where discussion isn't as emphasized, where it's more so about like absorbing information from your lecturer and not regurgitating it, but applying it more so in like writing or projects or labs or whatever it may be. Um, so to kind of like assert yourself, to like make yourself stand out, obviously you want to be like talking, you want to be going to office hours. Always go to office hours.
Okay.
No matter what school you're at, go to office hours. Get to know your professors because the academic culture over there was a lot more lax.
Okay.
Like at the end of the semester, I got like lunch with one of my professors,
I
which,
did too. While I was
yeah,
studying abroad. It was kind of weird, but
yeah, it's a lot more lax over there, which I really enjoyed. Um, and as for like a bit more of a social aspect rather than an academic aspect,
uh-huh.
you're only there for so long. I
Right.
was only in New Zealand for 4.5 months.
Mm-hmm.
I kind of had to learn how to like not really care that much what other people thought of me,
Right.
um, which I already had started kind of cultivating here. But being thrown into that setting with like that many people, meeting new people every day, yada yada yada,
Mm-hmm.
you really have to like confront yourself and be like, why do I
Right. Yeah.
care? And obviously, like that's a touchy subject because you don't want to like hurt anyone, obviously. But you just kind of have to learn how to like, if you see someone cool, talk to
Right.
them, like because you might not ever see them again.
Yeah. No, that's a really great point. Talk about like New Zealand as a culture more.
Mm,
Um, I spoke to someone else who had studied there before, and they had a lot to say about like the indigenous culture and stuff
hmm.
like that. Do you have any sort of thoughts and takeaways from that side of things?
Yeah. Compared to America, note compared to
Yeah.
America, New Zealand is very in touch with their indigenous culture. It is not a perfect relationship.
Mm-hmm.
While I was there were a lot of weird bills being introduced by kind of their version of the Republican Party, trying to like change names because a lot of the names in New Zealand are Maori names.
Mm-hmm.
Maori is the indigenous culture of New Zealand, um, and they were trying to change names and like outlaw these Maori schools from teaching their language, which is essential to their way of life.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but I will say, compared to America, New Zealand is miles ahead in terms of their relationship with their indigenous populations. Again, it is not a perfect relationship, and as of now, the current government is trying to strip back and erase a lot of those cultures and rights because I did take a Maori class while I was there, and we talked a lot about why the current government sucks.
Yeah.
But yeah, very in touch. And I'll also say, compared to American culture, they're a lot more introverted.
Okay.
Um, you don't get as many bombastic extroverted people as you would normally have in America. There's a bit more of, just because New Zealand only has like 5 million people, there's a
Right.
lot of emphasis on like the collective care of New Zealand.
Uh-huh.
I mean, you look at the COVID-19 pandemic and they just like shut down the country and they barely had any cases
Right.
because they are so small, so isolated.
Mm-hmm.
And that just kind of translates to the people too, because you kind of, especially as an American who can feign extroversion. I really had to like assert myself to like get to know people because most Kiwis are like very like level, very steady. They don't really want to break from their path. Of course,
Mm-hmm.
I'm speaking in broad strokes, but
Yeah.
that was kind of the pattern I
Okay.
noticed.
Gotcha. My experience in Europe is that there are kind of two camps of people studying abroad. There's the camp of people who are like, I want to take this as an opportunity to travel as many places as possible and see like as many things, let's say in the EU. And then there was the camp of I want to see as many things as possible in Germany or in the
Mm,
city that I'm living in kind of camp. And it sounds like that's not necessarily the case with people who don't study in the EU, but generally there is kind of that um, there is kind of a dichotomy between people who
yeah,
want to stay in and near their city versus go and see more. Which kind of camp would you put yourself into, and why? I
definitely the
guess.
more traveled, the more
Okay.
traveling movement
Uh huh.
camp. Um, Honestly, I'm not that much of a cities person. I also did Lawrence's London program
Okay.
last winter term, and as much as I adored that program, I had so much fun over there. I was also just kind of like, I don't really think I see myself living in a city.
Uh huh.
And that's kind of why I really wanted to go to New Zealand because I was starting to cultivate this like, oh, I actually do really like rural settings. I do want to be hiking on the weekends. I do want to be camping.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so while I was living in Auckland during the week doing my studies and studying and doing my homework, yada, 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 on the weekends, I would try to make an effort to like get out of the city as much
Yeah.
as possible. I remember when I got back, I think I was only in like Auckland, the city itself, for like 3 of the weekends,
Yeah.
just because I was like going out on weekends to hike, to camp, to travel around, to go on like a very impulsive road trip.
Uh huh.
Um, and it was a lot of fun. I got to see so much of the country. Um, and like America, New Zealand's also pretty car dependent.
Uh huh.
So road trips are like an essential. And obviously, they drive on the other side of the road, which is a really fun thing to learn. Yeah, yeah.
Okay, so I guess I mean this is always a hard it's always hard when I ask people for their favorite things, but could you outline some of your favorite spots you went to in New Zealand,
Mm,
like different places other than Auckland, and maybe like a little bit about why those are nice spots to hit if you're going to New Zealand?
yeah. So New Zealand, there are these things called Great Walks, and they are these like 7 like very famous hikes that you have to book out like months in advance.
Okay.
I never got to do any of them.
Mhm.
However, there is this one hike called Cape Brett on the North Island, which was being considered to be a great walk for a long time, but I
Okay.
don't think it is anymore. And impulsively, one of my friends was like, "Oh yeah, me and like these 2 other people are going. Do you want to help lead this trip with me?" And I was like, "Huh?" And originally I was just gonna stay in Auckland that weekend because I had like a big essay due that next week. But I
Uh-huh.
was like, why not?
Yeah.
Sure. And it ended up being like my favorite hike I took over there. It was this um, 2 day, 10 miles each day, out to this lighthouse on this like ridge line that extends into the ocean, um, constantly up and down and up and down, and
Yeah.
like you're going through the bush line and there was some like exposed peaks and you could just see like the lighthouse in the distance and how it like arcs out, and it was like some of the craziest terrain I've ever seen.
Uh-huh.
And at one point there was this like ridge right before you got to the lighthouse where it was just like drops on both sides to the ocean. It was like a little terrifying, but I was
Uh-huh.
like, this is why I came here, this is awesome. um that was probably my favorite hike I took. My favorite other city, I took a trip down to Wellington with a friend, also very impulsively. She was getting a tattoo done down there. 8 hour drive from Auckland. And it's kind of like the opposite of Auckland because it's like this really compact city, tiny streets, very lively, lots of bars, lots of social life happening. Um, and it was just like we spent the weekend there and it was just like, whoa, this is so much, but it's so much fun.
Uh-huh.
um And then I wish I could have spent a bit more time on the South Island of New Zealand,
Okay.
because that's kind of what you go to New Zealand for, because that's like the quote unquote prettiest part.
Mm-hmm.
No shade to the North Island. Love the North Island. That's where I spent most of my time.
Yeah.
But at the end of my time in New Zealand, I had a stretch of like 5 or 6 days where I didn't have anything going on. So I booked flights down to the South Island and I took a little solo road trip.
Okay.
And the city that probably impressed me the most down there was Wanaka. Really tiny, but really like cute. Lots of cute little coffee shops and like merchandise stores. And there's this lake right there, and there are these mountains in the lake. Wanaka's primarily known for this like, it's called hashtag that Wanaka tree. There's this like little spindly tree that is just growing out of the water somehow.
Huh.
And that's all it's known for. And I'm like, the rest of this town is so cute. Why is
Yeah.
nobody focusing on how cute the rest of this town is? So my friends and I would talk about that. When I got back, we had a funny little discussion about that. And then Christchurch was also nice.
Yeah.
I can talk about this more later, but IES also has a program in Christchurch, and our programs took a trip together to the Cook Islands.
Uh-huh.
And so I met some people over there that I visited in Christchurch, and they like took me out. And yeah, a lot flatter than other New Zealand cities. Christchurch really reminds me of like a low-rise Chicago. I
Okay.
feel like if Chicago had shorter buildings.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
All right. And what I always do like to ask people, but what would you compare Auckland to, like as an American city?
Ooh.
Can you think of one that would be like, this is it?
Hmm. A lot of my friends were saying San Francisco. I've never been to San Francisco, but just how like the fog is there in the morning and then lifts as the day goes on.
Uh-huh.
It's pretty like American looking and American feeling, just
Mm-hmm.
because of the wide roads. The highways in Auckland were designed by the same people who did them in Los Angeles, if
Gotcha.
that gives you any indication. Yeah, like a little Pacific Northwest, a little Californian. Um, yeah, and obviously the Sky Tower, which is like Auckland's probably most famous skyline
Uh-huh.
feature. It looks a lot like the Space Needle.
Okay, gotcha.
So yeah.
Okay. I can imagine it now. So, did you notice a significant like I feel like this is a weird way of putting it, but is there a significant like vibe shift from like the North Island to the South Island
Mm.
in just how people are or the culture kind of I don't know, like that city life that you were talking about compared to like Wellington and Auckland. Is that generally the case between the North and South Islands or is it a little I don't know.
Yeah, it is different.
Okay.
I really like that question because it's kind of similar to like how things are here, because the South Island is a lot more rural and a lot more white.
Uh-huh.
The North Island is pretty international. Um, but obviously, by virtue of the South Island being mostly like farmers and mountains and tiny little tourist towns,
Mm-hmm.
um, it's a bit more like reserved, a bit more conservative. Our program coordinator kind of like gave us an overview, like, especially because I am pretty vocally queer. She was like,
Yeah.
just like stick with people if you can. I didn't listen to her. I took a solo road trip on that, but it was fine. I mean, I was
Yeah.
sticking to touristy areas,
Uh-huh.
so it was fine. And it's New Zealand is also like one of the safest countries in the world. I knew nothing was going to happen.
Yeah.
But yeah, there is that vibe shift is very apparent. But that being said, my 6 days on the South Island I loved, because
Uh-huh.
obviously I'd said earlier I'm not very much of a cities person, and it was just fun to like drive in the mountains for like 5 days. It was just like,
Yeah.
wee.
No, I totally agree. And I mean, this is kind of personal, but are you from a city like originally before you came to Appleton?
Mm.
Or I know that in some of my other interviews I've had with people really defines whether or not they enjoyed their like city
Mm-hmm.
experience or why they wanted to go to a city for study abroad, things like that.
Yeah, I'm from like 5-10 minutes north of Milwaukee, so it's like pretty dense, and
Uh-huh.
access to nature isn't like that much. Like there's a park by my house, but other than that, I can't really like go on a hike. I have to drive like hour plus if I
Gotcha.
want to go hiking. Um, so it was kind of like blocked access from nature. And also when I was a lot younger, I didn't care for nature at all. I was like, I hate being outside. I hate being outside. I hate being outside. Um, but then like my freshman year here, something changed.
Okay.
Um, yeah, I started. I mean, I've always loved just taking walks, and I would
Mm-hmm.
do that in my hometown. I would do that here, and then I took this crazy road trip after like a huge like personal milestone in my life, um, and I went on this hike at night, and then the northern lights just appeared, and I was
Oh.
like, whoa, this is crazy. And I kind of took that as like some sort of like sign, like keep going outside, keep pursuing this. And that's ultimately one of the things that like guided me to New Zealand, was like that very spiritual experience I
Uh-huh.
had on that hike. Um, and then when I went to New Zealand, I had a lot more of those really like, whoa experiences,
Yeah,
which was awesome.
that's awesome. No, I kind of agree with the whole. I I also did a lot of hiking when I studied abroad
Mm.
because I was Freiburg is located in the Black Forest region of Germany. So
Whoa.
like I can show you a photo afterwards, but literally like from my apartment building you could see the Black Forest like out there, and it was like a 5 minute like tram ride to
Wow.
the like starts of the hiking trails. And so me and my roommates were like constantly out in the forest and stuff. And I I don't come from a city, and so Freiburg's like a city of I think like 500,000 people. So it's not
Mm.
that big compared to like US cities, but it
Mm-hmm.
was huge
Yeah.
compared to what I was used to. And I was like, Freiburg might be too big of a city for me to live in. And then somebody was like, Lillian, that's not a city, girl. Like, like I don't think you should ever live in like a real city. And so I learned a lot about my city
Mm.
self studying abroad too. But now I want to talk about hikes
Okay.
because
Okay.
yes.
Okay.
So I don't know if there's a way you want to like start off, take us there, but I was reading about your hikes in your blog, and I was so excited to hear about them
Mm.
because I also really like hiking. So I just want to hear whatever you want to tell me
About hiking. Oh
about
my
hiking.
gosh. Okay. So the kind of like how behind I
Mm-hmm.
was hiking so much. Auckland University has this thing called the Tramping Club. Tramping is what they call hiking over there, which is hilarious.
Love it.
I was a tramp when I was in New Zealand. Um, and like pretty much like every weekend there would be like 2 3 year trips organized by the club, by leaders of the club, going somewhere in the North Island to like, oh, maybe we'll just be doing like a day walk, or oh, maybe we'll just be, or maybe we'll be camping for like 4 nights.
Yeah.
And so I would be getting these emails in my inbox. I turned notifications on my phone because these trips usually would fill up
Uh
fast.
huh.
Um, and that's kind of how I met like a majority of my like friends over there, whether it be like international students, other international students, or like local Kiwis.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so the one that probably comes to mind first was my first trip with the Tramping Club. There's a subset of tramping over there called extreme ironing, where you bring an ironing board, a metal iron, and a pair of fancy clothes, and you mock iron your fancy clothes at various inopportune locations along a hike. Um, and this hike in particular, the All Trails review. All Trails, if you don't know, is an app
Yep.
where like you can like review hikes and say like, oh, the trail conditions were this, this, and this. It was a great hike, yada yada yada.
Mm-hmm.
The All Trails for this trail only had 2 reviews, and they were both very old. I don't know why the trip leaders took us there,
Uh huh.
but what ended up happening was it was like a very steep incline. I was holding the ironing board because I was feeling a little bit masochistic. Um, we were like going along these ridge lines, and then as it flattened out, the rain from like previous nights obviously started like pooling at
Mm-hmm.
these like more exposed flat parts. So the mud got like thigh deep.
Oh
It
my
was insane.
gosh.
And one of my good friends that I met on that trip was wearing like this white sweater, and she tripped in the mud. And it got covered in mud, and I have this ironing board, and like people are like shivering because it's like a little cold and there's a bit of a wind, and obviously they're damp from the mud. And like people are like ricocheting off the sides of the trails because that's dry because of all like the bush, like the dead bush. So they're just like like literally swinging over the trail. Um, And then there was also like a rappel at one point, which we did not know was going to be there. So we had to like scamper down this dodgy rope to like this other section of the trail down into the valley where the campsite was. And what ended up happening was the trip leaders were like, okay, that was really unsafe. Because the thing was, they marketed this as like a beginner hike.
Oh my
Like,
gosh.
oh, we'll just be having like 2 5-hour days. We'll get to campsite early. We'll get into our fancy clothes. Um, we all brought like high tea ingredients because that's kind of a part of the extreme ironing like lore, the
Uh-huh.
canon. Um, but the day took like 11 hours.
Oh my
Yeah.
gosh.
So we were there like after dark. And so the trip leaders were like, okay, um, obviously we cannot do this. There was this other trail like by that campsite that led to this other side of the road. So what was going to happen was the 3 drivers were going to hike back and go drive like the hour and a half around the road to pick us up on the other side. But they needed one more person. And so I volunteered. And so that next day we woke up at like 5 a.m.
Uh-huh.
and practically ran back to the other side to get back to Auckland before dark.
Right.
Because everyone had class that next day.
Uh-huh.
And so we like scampered back. It luckily didn't take nearly as long on the way back because we knew what we were getting into.
Right.
And that felt more like, that was only like 6 or 7 hours that
Gotcha.
it took to get back. And then we like hobbled into the cars and we scooped everyone up and we got to Auckland right at sunset. And
Wow.
yeah, that was like my first time with the tramping club. And I also kind of took that as a sign like I need to do more stuff with them because that was clinically hilarious.
Yeah, I mean, even just names wise, this already sounds like a great group of people. Like extreme ironing. I mean, that's just such a even
It's
the
so
concept
whimsical.
is so yes. I mean, iconic in all ways. Did you have any other crazy adventures with the tramping club then?
Ooh, I mentioned Cape Brett. Um, okay, I'll also talk about Bush School.
Mm-hmm.
Bush School was pretty much like you had to apply for it. It was this like, oh, how many days was it? It was like 3 or 4 days in this forest in the south of the North Island, so a bit more rugged
Uh-huh.
than like the north of the North Island, which is called the Northlands.
Mm-hmm.
Confusing names. But in this like more rugged forest, you had to like apply, and they were going to teach you compass nav, how to like bushwhack, how to bush bash, how to like locate a ridge line, how to use a topographical map to like locate where you are.
Wow.
Kind of intense stuff.
Uh-huh.
And I applied, and I kind of nepotismed my way in because the trip leaders who were leading that Bush School trip also led that extreme ironing trip. And so they're like, oh, Billy knows what they're doing. They
Yeah.
can come. And so we get to that, and then the weather is looking terrible. It's like pouring rain the entire weekend. And so I'm like, okay, I might die of hypothermia this weekend, but that's fine because I was kind of used to almost dying of hypothermia
At that
almost
point?
every weekend
Yeah.
at that point. So I was like, okay, it's chill. I'll just bring like an extra layer of thermals and I'll be fine.
Uh-huh.
And so we go out there. We get like our last like big meal before we start hiking. There's this like little juncture called Bombay Hills that's like about 30 minutes outside of Auckland, south of Auckland, that kind of like marks the end of Auckland and the beginning of more rural New Zealand. And there's this really good Indian restaurant there.
Okay.
And pretty much like every time we'd be going south, we'd stop at that Indian restaurant and get food to fuel up because it was just like massive portions and great fuel.
Uh-huh.
We keep going. We set up camp at like 1 a.m. because people had classes that day. So it was like we could only leave after classes. And then we wake up. It's not raining yet.
Yeah.
It's foggy. We climb up to these like alpine summits,
Mm-hmm.
just because they do have alpine kind of like climates in New Zealand, which I didn't know before going there. And it was just these like beautiful sprawling mountains with like insane vegetation. The vegetation there is like it feels prehistoric. It feels like
Okay.
you're in like the land before time.
Uh-huh.
And while it is cloudy, we're getting like pockets of sunshine. Because there's this massive lake kind of near this forest called Lake Taupo,
Mm-hmm.
and we're just seeing like the sun glisten on the lake from this mountaintop, and it's like, oh, it's gorgeous. because we were expecting kind of like bad weather.
Yeah.
We keep going. We're going down the ridge line. We're using like our compasses. We're like locating where we are in relationship to like other summits on the map. Um, and we get down to this like river valley, and it's this like gorgeous untouched river between these like two massive mountainsides.
Okay.
And you can just like see where the river flows, and you can like see the peaks in the distance, and like the sun is poking through just a little bit, and it's like the most gorgeous thing. um I also got to see an endangered duck there, which
Oh.
was sick, and I didn't even know it was endangered at the time. It was only after I looked that like I saw a fio, that's what they're called, a fio on the river, and I was like, whoa, that's
That's
crazy.
cool.
And so we set up camp, and the sky starts darkening, and I'm like, okay, it's probably just getting late,
Mm-hmm.
right? I know it's only like 3 p.m., but it's probably just getting late because the sun's behind the mountains,
Yeah.
right?
That's
Um,
totally it.
and so we start like, I'll always remember this. My group was gonna make like our community dinner, and so we
Uh-huh.
like opened our cans. We opened every can of like beans. We opened our carrots. We started cutting things, and we just kind of like left them on the ground on like plastic bags. We brought a cutting board.
Okay.
Then we heard some thunder, and then we felt it literally just immediately started downpouring. And given that we knew the temperatures that night were going to get really cold, we were like, we cannot get wet or else we will get hypothermia.
Mm-hmm.
And so we like everybody rushed back into their tents. I was sharing a tent with this guy who I'd been on like so many other trips with, and him and I took like the opened cans of beans that we did not get to use while we cooked, and they were just sitting in our tent the whole night. It just smelled like beans in our tent the whole night while it was raining outside. And usually on trips I would bring like a book or something, but
Uh-huh.
I like never had to read it before because I was always busy like getting to know people. But this was like the one instance I would want it. So what ended up happening was this guy and I just ended up talking for like 5 hours while it was like raining outside, and our tent smelled like beans, and obviously we couldn't make our community dinner, so we just had like lukewarm PB&Js that I packed because that was like my go-to packing thing.
Yeah.
Um, so
Oh
yeah,
man.
and then we woke up that next day. We took down camp. It wasn't raining that next day, thankfully.
Mm-hmm.
And then we learned how to do river crossings, which was a lot of fun. Um, and like the rip of the water was like really rough that day. So what you have to do on a river crossing is you have to like put your hand behind the back of your partner, grab the strap on their pack on the other side, and then your partner does the same. So you're like this like conjoined.
Yeah, like a bridge of people or something.
Yeah, and then you have to like step on small rocks because if you step on big rocks, you risk slipping.
Gotcha.
Um, and you also don't want to like step at the same time as your partner because you want to maintain as many points of contact with the like riverbed as
Uh-huh.
possible. And so we were just like scampering across this river, and my partner and I, who was also my tent mate, we got the fastest time out of everyone. We could like cross the river in like 30 seconds while everyone else was taking like 2-3 minutes, which
Nice.
felt good
Yeah.
because we were both runners, so it
Uh-huh.
was just like it was funny. Um, and then we also bushwhacked that day. So what happened was we went off trail and followed the ridge line up this mountain to its summit to like meet back up with the ridge trail.
Okay.
So it was like 4 hours of like, where's the ridge line? Oh, there's the ridge line. We're gonna go up it. And we were like slicing through branches, climbing over trees, like parting bushes.
Oh my gosh.
Um, yeah, it was crazy. And then we made it back to the trail. We went back to our cars. We had Turkish food on the way back,
Nice.
which was delicious. And yeah, that was Bush School.
That's awesome. Um, so I guess continuing with the adventures, do you want to talk about the trip that you took with IES to the Cook
Yeah.
Islands?
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, tell us about that.
Crazy.
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 Okay.
Like, I did not even like I knew of the Cook Islands before I
Mm-hmm.
went to New Zealand, but like I didn't know I was going to be going there.
Yeah.
We specifically went to this island called Rarotonga, which is
Uh-huh.
probably like the most like touristy, well known of the Cook Islands. And IES organized the whole thing. I think the trip they said was worth over like $3,000, but we only had to pay $600,
That's
which
awesome.
was a steal.
Yeah.
And so there were two accommodations because it was obviously IES Auckland and IES Christchurch going together.
Hmm.
I was in the really nice Airbnb, which was a
Nice.
lot of fun, and I was there with like all my girlfriends on my program. So we
Hmm.
just like we had our own pool.
Oh my
So it
gosh,
was just
that's
like I'm
crazy.
gonna pour a glass of lemonade in the kitchen and I'm gonna go sit by the pool and read, which was like so much fun.
Uh-huh.
And then we didn't have like too much downtime, and so we got to learn a lot about the Maori culture
Okay.
in the Cook Islands because it's very similar between the Cook Islands and New Zealand, but there are some like really key differences. Their pronunciations are a little bit different,
Hmm.
which was really fascinating to learn about. Um, the Cook Islands is also very religious. The role of Christianity and the relationship between like the colonialism of the Cook Islands and Christianity was very interesting
Hmm.
to learn about, unlike anywhere else I've ever experienced.
Okay.
Um, and we got to like make local food and have local food. I got to husk a coconut.
Okay.
I got to drink fresh coconut water.
Hmm.
If any of my friends are listening, you know how much I love coconut water. um, so that was so much fun. And we
Yeah.
also did a cross island hike where we hiked across the entire island. And the island isn't that big, it's only like 3 or 4 miles wide.
Okay.
Um, and so we like went up to like the volcanic summit of
Uh-huh.
the island, and there's this like massive like basalt form that's like a face, and it's like
Huh.
so fascinating. And you're not supposed to climb it. Um, and like my friends were joking about it, and I was like, you can't climb it, it's spiritual, it's sacred. um but the views were just insane because it was like ocean on one side, these rolling green hills,
Uh-huh.
ocean on the other side, so vibrant, um really gorgeous. And that doesn't even like begin to mention just like the actual beauty of the island itself.
Okay.
Massive beaches, sprawling beaches. You can get everywhere on bike. You can walk around the island if you want to.
Hmm.
Um, and we also had these like vans take us everywhere around the island, which was so fun because it was just like it was like 10 people in each van, and we're
Yeah.
like crammed shoulder to shoulder, and we're like sticking our head out the window. Um, and it was just so gorgeous. And we also took this little boat trip while we were
Okay.
there with this tour company to these like little other smaller islands, like right off the coast.
Hmm.
Um, and that was so much fun because they were like playing music for us. They were teaching us about like local culture. We got to sing with them. We got to scuba dive. I got to swim with some cool fish.
That's sick.
I swam under a coral reef, which was so awesome.
Wow.
And yeah, it was just like 5 days in this like crazy cool place I barely knew existed.
Uh-huh.
And I hope I get to go back there someday because it
Yeah.
was really like awesome. And we also got to meet all the Christchurch people, and it was really funny because like between my program and their program, there was a bit of like not. It was kind of like fake tension because it was like, oh, we are IES Auckland, we're sticking together, and I was like, I just want to meet people,
Yeah.
especially because there was really only like one to two other like very like outwardly queer people in my program,
Uh-huh.
and both of them weren't very like interested in like being outside for like extended periods of time, which is like everybody has their
Yeah.
interests. And I still got along with all the people in my program,
Uh-huh.
but then I met like all of these really awesome Christchurch people who like were a bit more like me, so that was really nice to have.
Uh-huh.
And that's honestly what motivated me to visit them later on
Gotcha.
in the semester, just because they were so cool and we had this like awesome immediate connection. It also helped that the program was paying for our drinks when we were
Yeah.
going out, because if you do study there, you are of age,
Uh-huh.
in New Zealand and in the Cook Islands. Um, and so we were just having these cocktails, we were playing darts, we were walking on the beach at sunset, collecting
Yeah.
shells, skipping rocks. Um, and it was like such a vacation, like a
Hmm.
vacation in all sense of the word. So relaxing, but also very educational and like fun filled. And yeah, it was a lot of fun.
That's awesome. And how far is the Cook Islands from Auckland? Like, I'm
Um,
assuming you took a flight.
it's like
So,
a 4.5 hour flight.
okay.
And the
Gotcha.
funny thing about it is you go over the international date line. So we left Auckland. Oh, we left Auckland, I think, we left like Friday night, and then technically we landed like right in the early hours of Friday in Rarotonga. And when we went back to Auckland, we
You
like
like missed a day?
lost a day. Yeah.
Well, that's crazy. I didn't even consider that as an like part of the calculus for your travel plans. Do you have any non hiking favorite moments or
mm,
stories that you want to share?
non-hiking favorite moments or stories. There was this jazz bar in Auckland, and they had live jazz every
Mm-hmm.
Sunday, Monday, and Tuesday. And I went there so much um, because I love a jazz bar vibe. And it
Yeah.
was like a really nice way, especially if I had like classes that day, it was a nice way to just like
Uh-huh.
unwind, catch up with friends, listen to some good music. My this like the lead singer slash saxophonist, him and I, he kept recognizing me, so we would like give each other looks because I thought he was cute or whatever.
Uh-huh.
Um, and we ended up having a conversation like right before I left, which was really sweet. Um, but yeah, I'd like go there with my friends, and the fun thing about like that place, which was called Caretaker, is that they don't have a set menu. Like
Okay.
one of the waiters or bartenders like comes over and like asks what you're looking for in a drink. So it's different every time.
Interesting.
So that was a lot of fun. And I also took a wine science class while I was
Hmm.
in New Zealand. They did advertise it to abroad students, but it was also very chemistry based. And obviously, as a humanities major, I know next to nothing about chemistry.
Uh-huh.
So it was a bit of an adjustment. But we had these like tasting labs where we would just like taste wines, and they were like, oh, don't drink the wine, spit them in your little spit bucket. And no one ever spit them in their spit bucket. It was like
Yeah.
a Wednesday night. So we'd leave wine science lab because I met some friends in there, tipsy, and then we'd like go out more.
Yeah.
Or once like lab ended, because lab ended weirdly early for that class, we would continue having like wine nights when we would have lab. Like
Uh-huh.
everyone would like someone would get the wine, someone would bring a dessert, someone would bring the dinner.
Yeah.
Um, and so those nights are like really fond to me because they were just it was just a little fun
Yeah.
translation. Um, yeah, and then this was like my last weekend in New Zealand. I knew I didn't have anything planned, and I was like, I want to do something on my own. I want to do something like chill but special that allows me to like reflect on my time here,
Mm-hmm.
kind of granola stuff like
Yeah.
that. And so I went to the bird sanctuary island, TDTD, which is about an hour ferry ride from Auckland. So it's really easy just to do on a weekend.
Okay.
Um, Crazy bird and wildlife there. The bird song is immaculate and loud and brash, and so many like alien kinds of birds.
Uh-huh.
Um, so that aspect was really cool. And then at night, you could go kiwi spotting.
Okay.
The kiwi bird, the
The
national
bird.
emblem of
Yeah.
New Zealand, they are dumb, they are blind, they are deaf, they do not like white light, they are nocturnal, and they die very easily, unfortunately.
Oh.
So they're kind of like, just because mammals didn't exist in New Zealand besides bats until the advent of colonialism,
Uh-huh.
um, so the kiwi evolved to be like kind of dumb, and so unfortunately they're like a little bit endangered. But if you go out at night with like a red head torch,
Uh-huh.
you can go looking for them. And one of them like literally crawled across the path like an inch away from my feet, and I was there with these like two other older like kiwi women, and they were like, I've never seen a kiwi get that close to someone before. So that was a really special memory on
That's so
TDTD.
cool.
Um, and then there was also this like beach with no one on it, and it was like the most gorgeous beach I've ever been
Uh-huh.
on. So I just tanned for like 4 hours. Because the sun above New Zealand, there's a lack of ozone above New
Oh.
Zealand, so the sun is like thick. That's how I felt it. It was like a very thick sun, so you always have to be applying sunscreen.
Uh-huh.
But as a result, I got really tan.
All right. I mean, yeah.
Yeah, I only got sunburnt like once or twice.
That's honestly, you're probably doing pretty well with only getting one or two sunburns in that situation. Okay, so I guess transitioning a little bit, um, one of the blogs that you wrote about was like the last one is the one that I was thinking of,
Mm-hmm.
where you talk about your experience with your identity in New Zealand. And I thought it was just really really honest and like raw and touching. And I didn't know
Thank
if
you.
you wanted to speak a little bit about how, like, one, how and why you decided to write such an open and like
Hmm.
honest interpretation of your experience there, because I know personally I would be like, I'm not sure I want that out like totally out there
Yeah.
necessarily. So I guess how did you come to deciding that that was going to be like your last kind of thing to say about your time
Hmm.
in New Zealand blogging?
Yeah, great question. Thank you for reading it.
Yeah.
Um, Obviously, as I mentioned earlier, a lot of my articles were primarily concerned with giving like a blueprint for
Mm-hmm.
future students. But the common like through line underneath my entire experience in New Zealand was like advocating for myself.
Mm-hmm.
Just because I am non-binary and queer, people aren't necessarily as vocal about it in New Zealand. They're like tolerant of it,
Uh-huh.
but a lot of people just haven't encountered people like that. So for a lot of Kiwis and a lot of other international students, I was like the first non-binary queer person they met.
Okay.
Um, so it was really interesting, like the conversations I had with people, and also just like advocating that at the at like the front of my identity. If someone like used incorrect pronouns for me, I would be like, oh, I go by they.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so the reason I kind of wrote about it was because it was that common through line. I was also one of the diversity bloggers with IES because we
Okay.
had the option to apply um, as like an ideas blog correspondent, which like particularly you just basically had to write at least like one article focusing on your identity.
Okay.
So one side of it was a contractual
Gotcha.
obligation. Um, but I also knew like I had these very like profound experiences over there relating to my queerness that
Mm-hmm.
I don't think I could have ever had in America. Um, that were a lot more like unspoken and understated than I feel like they would normally be in America, just because New Zealand is a bit more of an introverted culture. Um, and I wanted to ground that because I was having these big feelings, and ultimately that's what writing is for me. It's like putting to words how I'm feeling in
Uh-huh.
the simplest terms, and doing something artful with it. Um, and so I just sat down and like wrote it because having that out there, I feel like will hopefully give like other queer students who are interested in New Zealand like hope
Uh-huh.
that like they can exist and flourish there. But also maybe be a bit of a cautionary tale too, because I did talk about in that blog like a bit of the shortcomings.
Right.
Um, and I mean, it does get lonely.
Uh-huh.
Study abroad, you do get lonely, no matter who you are. But learning to encounter that and learning to like face that is one of the biggest takeaways I
Yeah.
had, and learning how to like really tool your solitude to become a better person.
Yeah. Absolutely. No, I think that's a great common thread that almost everyone that I've talked to has, is like study abroad does teach you how to like be content by yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And for a lot of us who have been here back at Lawrence now for a little bit longer, we've seen that it's actually like we kind of start to want to be a little less connected at
Yeah,
Lawrence, you know, and
I'm definitely feeling
yeah.
that.
Are you feeling it? I guess my next question is how are you finding coming back to Lawrence, and how is the adjustment going? I mean, it's been what, we're 2 weeks, 3 weeks into term,
Yeah.
something like that. So what are your takeaways now that you've sort of been able to have a week or two to get readjusted to the Lawrence situation?
Mm. Well, I was fortunate enough to be able to move in early during D
Okay.
term, which was really nice because I have a job in town that I wanted
Mm-hmm.
to pick back up. So it wasn't like a complete adjustment.
Gotcha.
So I just kind of got to like move all my stuff up when hardly anyone else was here, and really like although that was probably like the loneliest I've ever been because I
Yeah.
wasn't like with my family. I wasn't no part like none of my friends were here.
Right.
It was so nice,
Yeah.
especially after how crazy and hectic New Zealand was. It was just
Yeah.
nice to be able to like walk around the river because it was a bit warmer back then,
Yeah.
um, and work and read and write and just really like take that time for myself.
Mm-hmm.
So that was like my primary adjustment. And now that everyone's back, obviously it's been so amazing seeing my
Yeah.
friends again, just because I have such amazing friends here,
Mm-hmm.
that I am boundlessly thankful for. But a part of me does kind of miss that solitude.
Yeah.
So I'm trying to like incorporate that back into my schedule a bit
Mm-hmm.
more. I mean, yesterday I went on a little, I originally was just going to be like, okay, I'm just going to go for like, like an hour long walk, just like be by myself, not listen to music, be one with nature. And it ended up being this like 3 hour side quest where I like went to my car and I took like a drive and I went to this park. I walked around this park for a bit and then I went to like CVS, picked up a couple necessities, kept driving, came back, took like a scenic route home. It was sunset. It was pretty. And like I got that like little New Zealandy feeling again. Like
Yeah.
I'm on my own. I'm exploring this place. I'm just
Yeah.
kind of being. I'm just being.
Yeah.
Um, so it was nice to just kind of have that little impulsive moment of wonder again.
Mm-hmm.
And moments like that, I feel like are hard to come by with people. So it was nice to like have that again.
Yeah. No, I totally agree. I feel like there's something unique about the study abroad experience in general. The
Mm-hmm.
idea of picking up all your stuff and just jetting across the world to
Yeah.
start, like, not start over, but start a new adventure where you, at least for me, I don't, was there anyone else from Lawrence at,
There were two other people from Lawrence, but I like
didn't
didn't
know
know
them?
them all
Okay.
that well before going.
Yeah. So I had no one else from Lawrence
Mm.
really. And so it's like you're basically starting from scratch.
Yeah.
You're on your own and you come to make all of these friends and all these awesome relationships. But at the beginning, um,
It's
yeah, there's
terrifying.
it's terrifying. It's thrilling.
Yeah.
Just it's so remarkable, and I've never done anything like it. But I do relate to, like, whenever I get out and I'm just by myself, I'm kind of brought back to those first moments where you're like, I'm on this adventure,
Ah,
just me, myself, and I. And
and
it's just, yeah.
yeah, in that same token, like I remember landing in New Zealand and being like, I know nobody in this country. I know nobody in this country after this like 14-hour flight. I was delirious because I can't sleep on planes, and I was just like, what's gonna happen?
Yeah.
There's so much possibility. And I think like in that possibility, just because like so much can happen in a study abroad and so much did happen,
Mm-hmm.
what it really teaches is like, what do you come home to? Who
Right.
do you come home to? Um, what practices have you cultivated in your own solitude before and during study abroad? Do you like always come back to?
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so in that sense, it really like study abroad defines who you are.
Yeah.
It really like cements you in place because you're changing all of these contexts, but at the end of the day, you're still you.
Yeah.
And a lot of writers, I feel like, take that as a kind of like a sad truth, but I'm choosing to view it as like kind of awesome.
It is. No, it definitely is. Um, so I guess on that note, the last thing I always ask is why, if somebody came up to you and said, "Why should I study abroad?" What would your response be?
Mm.
It's so broad, and so you can take it any way you kind of want to, but
I'm not gonna say to like find yourself or
yeah.
whatever, but like it's really like you get to know who you are
Mm-hmm.
when you study abroad. Just because, I mean, depending on where you go, like everything changes, especially from an environment like Lawrence, which is very singular and unique
Mm-hmm.
and like compact and insular. Going anywhere like will change you.
Yeah.
Um, and it really it just teaches you how to be on your own
Mm-hmm.
and have fun with that.
Yeah.
Just because I feel like we're socialized to always be looking for connection,
Mm-hmm.
always demand connection. But at the end of the day, like you need to have the best relationship you should have in your life is with yourself.
Absolutely.
And you can really cultivate that when you're not in your comfort zone.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so I guess like why you should study abroad is if you want to get to like really know who you are at your core. What do you bring to the table? Um, who are you fundamentally as a person? Like who keeps the lights on at
Yeah.
home? Study abroad.
Study
If you want to
abroad.
know,
Yes, put yourself out there,
it's
and
it's terrifying. but it's good to know.
Absolutely. I mean, I this is kind of a cliche analogy, but it kind of reminds me of like a tea bag. Like if you just put it in
Hmm.
normal water, the water just stays the same. But as soon as you pour hot water on it, it starts to become this like new thing.
Oh.
And so the hot water is study abroad. Like putting yourself out there into a situation you're uncomfortable with is when you
I don't
really
think
get
that's
that
cliche at all. That's a lovely
transformational.
analogy.
So yeah. But that's my take on it too.
Hmm.
So very, very last thing. Do you have anything on campus that you kind of want to shout out or talk about? I always give people
Oh.
like a yeah. What's your 2 cents about things to do on campus?
Um, we're about to have pretty massive turnover at the Laurentian, which is the student newspaper. So if you want to start writing for us, come join. It's a lot of fun. I'm going to be sticking around as co-editor in chief, so you get to work with me, which I hope is fun. Um, and you should also take a dance class.
Okay.
You should take a dance class. Yeah.
Laurentian and dance class. Well, Billy, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for
And
having me, Lillian.